Warning, this content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. This video is brought to you by First Detachment Nutrition. Battle tested, expert formulated. Use discount code AB10 at checkout for 10% off. All right, folks, Big Paul here today, and we are going to talk about HIIT training versus high volume training. So, ladies and gentlemen, keep your feelings in check. A lot of people get upset when we talk about which is the best style of training. I'm going to play devil's advocate. We're going to go through each and why one might be better than the other, the good, the bad, the ugly of each style of training, and why one or the other might be better for bodybuilding. And we're going to dig into all that in just 1 second. All right, folks, the HIIT training versus volume training video, my editing software decided to completely screw me and trash my video, but I have the audio and I think it's great. I don't want to re-record it because I don't know if I can do it better a second time. So here it is without the video. The audio is still there. It's still fantastic. Hope you enjoy it. All right, so we'll start this one off with HIIT training. For those of you not in the know, high intensity training, recently repopularized by the rise of Mike Mentzer 20 years after he died, or 25, whatever it was. HIIT training has come back to the surface again with Mike Mentzer's popularity. Mike Mentzer might not be the best representation of all types of HIIT training. It is one type, and a lot of people got their ideas on HIIT training from Mike Mentzer, but there's also Dorian Yates style, there's DC training, there's JP, Jordan Peters, Dusty Hanshaw does a type of DC training. And there are pluses and minuses of HIIT training. I did HIIT training for a large portion of my 20s. So there's a group of people out there that say, you don't know shit about HIIT training. You don't know what you're talking about. Right now, I'm doing more of a volume-based style training, but I do have some HIIT principles in my training. So I am not anti-HIIT training like people think I am. I did HIIT training for many years, and it can be productive if done properly. What I do think is BS is Mike Mentzer's style of HIIT training. I don't think his way of training and his suggestions and the methodology there is that productive for bodybuilding purposes. If you want to do it for gym, that's fine. So let's talk about the positives of HIIT training. What makes HIIT training great for would-be bodybuilders? 1, you're in and out of the gym quickly. Recovery is maximized. Intensity is maximized. Often you're able to squeeze a little more frequency into things if you follow some principles like DC or JP. I know with Dante Trudell, the DC training, when I worked with Dante personally trained me many years ago. For those of you that don't think I know anything about HIIT training, Dante trained me for several years. And when I did DC training with Dante, we would hit every body part roughly 3 times in a 2-week period of time. I only trained about 3 or 4 days a week, something like that. Dante would have training splits that were an A-B split or sort of a push-pull leg where you would go every other day in the gym and you end up hitting things with more frequency and with high intensity. The positive of this style of training is it is true progressive overload style of training. So if you're going to put your all into a single working set per exercise, it makes it easy to quantify and easy to wrap your head around progressing from week to week. You simply just beat the logbook. If you did X amount of reps with the weight last week, and you need to do 1 more rep than that this week, it is that simple. Then you slowly progress the weights up in a given rep system. So let's say that your reps are somewhere in the 8 to 10 rep or 8 to 12 rep range. When you hit that 12th rep, then you bump the weights up by 5 pounds. I remember Dante Trudell used to tell me that the 2.5 pound plate is your best friend, and you just continually progress over and over and over again. And there's plenty of rest in there to maximize recovery. You go to absolute failure. Sometimes you do set extenders such as drop sets or rest pauses if you're doing a DC style of system. And it's almost foolproof in that if you get bigger, if you get stronger within the constraints of good form, I'm going to put an emphasis on that, within the constraints of good form, there's only one possible outcome if you've gotten stronger and your weight has increased and you haven't gotten fatter. You've added more muscle. That's what makes it crazy simple, easy to follow, probably a decent way of training for beginners. As we get into more advanced training and as you progress as a bodybuilder, there's arguments against it. So that is the plus of the traditional HIIT style of training. Plenty of rest and recovery. It's easy to quantify progress. It's not nebulous where you're doing a bunch of sets and you don't really know if you've progressed or not. It's really simple to train that way. You don't have to really think that much. I will say this, and I emphasize this, and I think this is something that people get critically wrong all the time. When I worked with Dante was very strict with form. You have to keep your form exactly the same on all your exercises, your rep pace. So if you're doing a 3-second negative or whatever it is, I'm just using an arbitrary number, that does not change. You do not hump your back. You do not change. You want to put yourself in a maximal position for stimulating hypertrophy, placing the most load possible on the muscle. Otherwise, you're just getting better at cheating. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong with the traditional progressive overload style of training. They just get better at cheating. They actually haven't gotten stronger. They actually haven't gotten bigger. And also people pair it up with really stupid diets that make no sense as well. So if you have your diet buttoned up, your PEDs are buttoned up and correct, and you're training with good form, and you're progressing and you're gaining weight and not getting fatter, then it's really a foolproof system for adding size. Now let's look at the negatives of it. What are the negatives of the HIIT style of training? And this is what I ran into as I got bigger. Going to failure or beyond failure or doing crazy stuff with heavier weights as you get stronger, the risk of injury dramatically goes up. Modern studies have shown us that we don't need to go to absolute failure to progress and to evoke hypertrophy. So we know that now. Now, with that said, I think a lot of people train like absolute sissies. Got to be careful. YouTube doesn't want me using the word with the P in it, but you know what I'm saying. A lot of people train like sissies and they use the rep and reserve system as an excuse to train like they are soft. So that is one thing that the HIIT style training takes out of the equation. If you go to absolute failure, you cannot squeeze another rep out. When mechanically you have failed, you know you have put your 100% into that rep. You know exactly where things are. You can quantify it and you can progress. That is where things get a little nebulous with reps and reserve style of training with higher volume style training. Now, what going to absolute failure does is vastly increase the risk of injury. You're increasing the risk of injury, especially as you progress and get stronger. I got incredibly strong training Dante's style of system. I got crazy strong on some stuff. I eventually got up, I think, where I was incline pressing 405. The risk of injury and going to absolute failure on 405 on incline presses is dramatically higher than it would be if you were incline pressing 135 pounds or 185 pounds. So the risk of having an injury dramatically goes up. Definitely doing 135 or 185 on an incline barbell press is way less of a risk going to absolute failure than it is with 405. Also, you get to a certain level of training with how far can you progress a certain weight. I've seen that with Jordan Peters. You know, how far can you progress a certain amount of weight? And there comes to a point where you don't really need to progress weight. You need to fine tune your physique. 99% of people don't get there. That is the absolute advanced portion of bodybuilding. So that's not a problem until you absolutely get there. But once you're an advanced bodybuilder, probably a guy knocking on the door of having a pro card or already having a pro card, you might want to reevaluate how you train. And do you really need to do that type of stuff? Do you need to take that sort of risk? We can take a look back at the history of bodybuilding, and guys that have trained that way usually don't last. Dorian Yates is an example that everybody likes to point to. Dorian. I hear that. Dorian's system was very different. I would say his was a moderate to low volume style. If you actually watch Dorian train, what he would consider a warm-up set, to me, would be a working set now. Granted, his volume was lower, and Dorian talked about it. He used to do top sets and back-off sets, and then he would do a couple feeder sets and the stuff, and it was lower volume, but it wasn't Mike Mincer one set every 10 days type of training. What you will see, though, with a lot of guys that train this way, they end up getting hurt if they continue to train that way as they're professionals. They generally don't make it past 40 years of age in professional bodybuilding. Now, maybe that's fine. Dorian ended up winning multiple Olympias. If you told me I was going to rip my tricep off my bone, rip my bicep off the bone, and I would have 4 or 5 Olympia titles by the time I'm 35 or 36, sign me up, motherfucker. I'm going to do that. Maybe it was worth the risk for him. But there is also, I was talking to Dr. Mike Israetel about this, the survivorship bias. And I never really considered this before until Mike brought this up. People tend to have a bias towards people that survive and make it there. Maybe Dorian just got lucky. How many other people have trained that way and never made it to the super advanced level of bodybuilding? Maybe Dorian just got lucky and didn't get injured until later on. It's just like somebody that plays football for 15 years and never has an injury. Is it something unique that guy did, or did he just get lucky and survive? And that's essentially what the survivorship bias is. It is just as important to look at all the people that failed and didn't make it as it is to look at the people that make it. Now, if we pull back and look at bodybuilding as a whole, most advanced bodybuilders do not do a HIIT style of training if they're going to last. They eventually train differently. They pull back their weights a bit. They add a little more volume. They train with a little more intelligence. And the argument I hear from the HIIT advocates is they never would have gotten that big if they didn't train that way. Possibly. We don't know. All right, so let's talk about higher volume training, the advantages of higher volume training. Key one I just hit on here when I talked about the HIIT training is less chance of injury with higher volume training. There is definitely a lower chance of injury if you're using less weights, if you're keeping reps and reserves, and you don't go to failure. The injury risk dramatically decreases. You look at a guy like Jay Cutler. Jay Cutler was a volume trainer. I put him in the video picture, the thumbnail, because I think Jay is probably the most famous volume trainer that we can think of that's been an Olympian. Completely opposite style of training from what Dorian Yates did. If you watch videos of Jay training, he would use like 120 pound dumbbells and do multiple sets with them. I had the pleasure of talking to Jay after the Jay Cutler Classic when I competed there several years ago. And he told us that he rarely pressed over 100 or 120 pound dumbbells when he was doing his dumbbell presses. And the guy was Mr. Olympia. There are 160 pound dudes in your gym that are doing that much with dumbbell presses. But Jay made it work. Jay was able to get big. Jay didn't have all the injuries that the guys that lifted heavier and did higher intensity training. He didn't have all the injuries that they did. Now, some of that could be just luck. Once again, survivorship bias. But that is an advantage of training with higher volume. I do also think that higher volume guys have a different look to them. They have a more bubbly, round, 3D look to them. And a lot of that has to do probably with diet and how diet pairs up with high volume training. This is another consideration that dudes don't seem to make. If you're eating higher carbohydrate diets, if you're using insulin, and you're leveraging other PEDs, does it really make sense to do low volume style of training when you're not taking advantage of that insulin, of using the pump? Milos Sarchev, he has a training system, I think it's the hyperemia or something training system or whatever, where he talks about using volume to push blood, push nutrients in the muscle while eating high carbohydrates and using insulin. We don't think about that with the HIIT training. You probably can't take advantage of that with a HIIT style of training. So there's also how your diet, your PEDs pair up with your style of training. And there does seem to be an advantage to having that style of training with the diet and with the PED use. There does seem to be an advantage, especially with GH, insulin, etc. And I think you will see that most top pros on the stage right now are using a moderate to a higher volume style of training. You really don't see that many guys at the elite level in bodybuilding that are doing HIIT training. And that's probably why, because they want to avoid injuries, and they are also taking advantage of their diet, their PED use, and how that pairs up with the training. So that is another consideration to make when it comes to choosing your style of training. Another advantage of higher volume style training and keeping some reps in reserve is that you can train with more frequency. You can get into the gym multiple times a week. I train 6 days a week. I do a push-pull legs routine, and I train twice a week, but I don't train anything to failure anymore. If I train to failure or to beyond failure, I would need a lot more time for recovery. So there is a trade-off. If you're pushing everything to absolute failure, if you're pushing things beyond failure, if you're using heavy weights, if you're using heavy compound movements, you are going to need more time to recover. If you're more intelligent with your exercise choices, if you keep some reps in reserve, if you keep things in check there, you can train with more frequency. There is an argument to be made. If you train with more frequency, that is more opportunities for eliciting growth / hypertrophy. So that is another advantage to consider. Some disadvantages of the higher volume style of training. You're going to be in the gym a lot. You're going to be in the gym a lot. If you're not training to absolute failure, you have to use more volume. There's just no two ways around it. If you don't like being in the gym, if being in the gym annoys you, if you don't have time for it, probably not going to work well for you. Another disadvantage of it is some guys psychologically, and I used to be this way, just enjoy pushing bigger weights around. When I was younger, I wanted to be the biggest and the strongest guy in the gym, both. And it can be a bit of a mind fuck when you're using the 100-pound dumbbells, when you know you can push the 150s. When you're 270, 280 pounds and you're lifting the same weight that the 180-pound guy is, sometimes it can mess with your head. There's that aspect of it too. I think it's silly at this point in my life. I don't really care about how much weight I lift. I just want to look great on the stage. But that is another consideration as well. Do you even enjoy training that way? If you don't enjoy training, you're probably not going to put a lot into it. Me, personally, at this point in my life, I enjoy training with more volume. I enjoy having a pump. I enjoy being in the gym with my friends. I like having more frequency. I go to the gym 7 days a week, most of the time. I just like being there. That can be a downside for some people. Some people just don't have time for that. Another disadvantage for that style of training is you are definitely going to need to eat more carbohydrates. If you're a person that doesn't handle carbs well or don't like eating carbs, high volume training is probably not the best thing for you. It seems like most of the guys that are HIIT trainers, at least from what I've seen, tend to eat lower carb, higher fat diets. That's what I've seen. You have to consider how your diet in the style of diet that you like to do pairs up with your training. There's another consideration that you need to make. Another disadvantage of high volume training is it's hard to quantify, especially if you're keeping reps in reserve. It's hard to quantify. It's really almost impossible to use a logbook. I mean, how are you going to track doing 5 sets of 10 reps with 100 pounds on dumbbell presses? And, a guy like Jay Cutler may have used the same weight every week for his entire career. Sometimes you're just pushing volume up. A lot of it is feel, and you don't have that logbook to beat. That can be a mind fuck as well. That messed with my head when I was training with more volume versus training a HIIT style training. I was so used to having a logbook to defeat every week, knowing that I was progressing weights. And then when I wasn't doing that, I'm like, what am I doing? I like having a goal. I like having something quantifiable. That messed with my head. Psychologically, if that's what you need, this might not be a style of training for you. Also, I think age plays a role into this as well. Kind of circling everything up, doing the whole HIIT versus high volume. Let's take a look back and see which might be best for you in your bodybuilding journey. Another thing to consider is age. Like I said, I can't go to failure on things or beyond failure or do heavy barbell compound movements at 50 years old. I'm just going to break. Even with more rest. Like guys will say, well, you just need more rest days. Sorry, Jack. Doesn't work that way anymore. And if I can't stay in the gym because I am injured and my joints hurt, I can't progress. If I can't train hard because I'm always sore and beat up, I can't progress. That is something to consider when you're 50 years old or 40 years old, when you're getting some miles on the tires. When you're a 20-year-old, you can go balls to the wall, get up and do it all over again. Hell, I could go play a tackle football game when I was 22 years old, go out and drink tequila shots all night long, get 5 hours of sleep, get up, go to work, and do it all over again, and I'd be just fine. If I did that now, I'd be a goddamn cripple, and I'd be in the hospital. Miles on the tires, training age, actual chronological age, they all play a role in your style of training. I think if you're an older guy, training with a HIIT style of training might not be the best choice. Dante's suggestion is just up the rep ranges into a rep range that you feel comfortable in, and also pick exercises that you feel safe lifting with. And that is solid advice. Very solid advice. So you can make it work, but it becomes a bit more difficult. If I'm up doing 20 reps on one set, why wouldn't I just do 10 reps on 2 sets or whatever? I think it becomes relative at that point. So I don't get too hung up on labels on training. I want to do what the most optimal style of training. I think dudes get wrapped up into this mindset of where they need to belong to a certain club. I'm team Mike Mincer, team whatever. To me, that's just silly. Pick the training that works best for you. You may need to adapt some things from multiple different areas. Don't worry about being a part of some team or club. I think when people get locked in on one philosophy, it makes you get stuck in a rut, and it's illogical. Do what works the best. That's try to be flexible. That's what I have always done. I've tried everything over the years, different styles of diets. I've done keto. I've done carnivore. I even went without eating meat for a while just to see what that was like. And it sucked. I have tried high carb. I've tried low carb. I've tried every style of diet, and I figured out what works for me, what works for my body, and I've tried to optimize things to what works the best for me. Do what you love. Do what feels best for you, and take that all the way. I will say this. When I take a step back and look at things logically and think about things logically, I like to look at what the most amount of people are having the most success with. And when you look at the pro bodybuilding stage, if your goal is to be a pro bodybuilder and to be the best pro bodybuilder that you can possibly be, I take a look at what the mean, the average, what they are doing. And the majority of pro bodybuilders, when you look at it, are doing a moderate to high volume style of training they're eating plenty of carbs, they're eating plenty of protein, and they're taking all the similar types of PEDs. You know, it's all the same. So that is what the broadest amount of pro bodybuilders are doing. So that tells me that you will probably have your best chance of success emulating what the rest of those guys are doing. That's not to say that you can't have success other ways. Guys like Dorian Yates have proven that. There are many paths to success, but ultimately choose the one that works for you. All right, folks, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you think I'm wrong, I'm an idiot, or you want to leave a comment, put it in the comment section below. Please check out our Anabolics e-course, The Scientific Principles of Anabolics and PEDs. It is the most comprehensive and science-based PED e-course out there. Link is in the video description below. Take care. For coaching or consultations, head over to www.anabolicbodybuilding.com to book your spot today. I can help you with optimizing hormones, fat loss, muscle gain, physique, athletic performance, nutrition, and health. For more information, shoot me an email at bigp3rd@gmail.com.